My daughter-in-law Susan invited me to her family dinner, wearing my old Sunday dress. Everyone laughed at my appearance. But when dessert arrived, the waiter brought a document with her signature that made her cry. Before we start, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories. My name is Annie Morrison, and at 68 years old, I never imagined I'd be telling this story. But sometimes life teaches you lessons in the most unexpected ways, and sometimes the people you trust most become strangers right before your eyes. I've always been the kind of woman who puts family first. When my husband James passed away 15 years ago from a sudden heart attack, I was left to raise our 3 children alone. David was barely 18, heading to college. Sarah was 16, angry at the world for taking her father. And little Michael was just 12, still needing help with homework and someone to check under his bed for monsters that didn't exist. People often ask me how I managed. The truth is, you just do what needs to be done. I took on a second job at the grocery store, working nights stocking shelves after my day shift at the dental office. My hands, which once played piano at church gatherings, became rough from handling boxes and cleaning supplies. But every blister, every aching joint, every exhausted morning was worth it when I saw my children graduate, one by one. David was my oldest, my pride. He had his father's eyes and my stubborn determination. When he married Susan 8 years ago, I thought I was gaining a daughter. She was beautiful, accomplished, worked at a marketing firm downtown. I remember the day David brought her home for the first time. She wore designer heels that clicked on my worn linoleum floor, and I served my famous pot roast on my mother's china, the only nice set I owned. "Mrs. Morrison," she had said that day, taking my weathered hands in her manicured ones, "David has told me so much about you. What a strong woman you are." I believed her sincerity then. Why wouldn't I? When you've spent your whole life giving love, you expect to receive it in return. That's the thing about trust. It's like a favorite sweater. You wear it so often you don't notice when it starts to unravel until you're standing there, cold and exposed. Over the years, I became the grandmother every child dreams of. I babysat Emma and Jake whenever Susan needed to work late or attend important client dinners. I taught Emma how to braid her hair the way my mother taught me, using the same patient repetition, the same gentle encouragement. With Jake, I spent countless afternoons in the park, pushing him on swings until my arms ached, because his laughter was medicine for my aging soul. My apartment wasn't much, a 1-bedroom on the 3rd floor of a building that had seen better days. But it was clean, filled with photographs of family, memories, and always smelled like fresh-baked cookies when the grandchildren visited. My Social Security check and James's small pension covered the rent and utilities, with just enough left over for groceries if I was careful. I clipped coupons religiously, bought generic brands, and considered a fancy coffee from the corner shop my monthly splurge. But wealth isn't measured in dollars, is it? It's measured in the cards your grandchildren make you with crooked hearts and misspelled words. It's in the Sunday dinners where everyone crowds around your small table, sharing stories and stealing extra helpings of mashed potatoes. It's in being needed, being loved, being part of something bigger than yourself. I thought Susan understood this. I thought she saw beyond my secondhand clothes and modest living. I thought she valued the woman who had raised the man she claimed to love. I was wrong about everything. My days had settled into a comfortable rhythm, the kind of predictable pattern that brings peace to an old woman's heart. Every morning at 6:30, I would wake to the sound of Mrs. Chen's television through the thin walls. She always watched the morning news at full volume because her hearing aid needed new batteries she couldn't afford. I'd make my way to the kitchen, my joints protesting the first few steps until they remembered their purpose, and put the kettle on for tea. That morning ritual was sacred to me. While the water boiled, I'd stand at my small kitchen window and watch the city wake up. The young couple across the street would rush out with their coffee cups, always running late. The old man on the corner would walk his ancient beagle, both of them moving at the same unhurried pace. I'd prepare my English breakfast tea in the china cup James bought me for our 20th anniversary, one of the few pieces that survive the years, and carry it to my living room. The mantel above my non-working fireplace held my treasures. Not jewelry or valuables, but photographs in mismatched frames I'd collected from yard sales and thrift stores. David's college graduation, where he wore James's old tie. Sarah's wedding day, her smile radiant despite the budget venue. Michael's first day as a teacher, following in my footsteps of serving others. And of course, my grandchildren. Emma in her school played dressed as a sunflower, Jake with his first missing tooth, grinning like he'd won the lottery. 3 times a week, I'd tend to my balcony garden. It wasn't much, just a few pots with tomatoes, herbs, and one stubborn rosebush that refused to give up despite the city pollution. Mr. Rodriguez from 2B had given me the seedlings 2 years ago, and now I had enough basil to share with neighbors. There was something hopeful about watching things grow, about nurturing life even in a concrete jungle. My hands might have been spotted with age, but they still knew how to coax beauty from the earth. Wednesdays were grocery days. I'd walk the 8 blocks to Save Mart with my canvas bags, the ones Emma had decorated with fabric markers during a rainy afternoon visit. The manager, Tony, always saved the day-old bread for me, wrapped in extra plastic with a kind wink. "For the birds," he'd say, though we both knew half would end up as French toast when the grandchildren visited. My weekly phone calls with the family were scheduled like church services. David called Tuesday evenings after dinner, usually while helping Emma with homework. I could hear her in the background, frustrated with fractions or struggling with spelling words. Sarah checked in on Thursdays during her lunch break, always eating a salad at her desk while filling me in on her husband's latest home improvement disaster. Michael preferred video calls on Saturdays, showing me around his new classroom or introducing me to his girlfriend of the month. But Sundays were special. Despite my tight budget, I insisted on hosting family dinner once a month. I'd start cooking at noon, filling my tiny apartment with the smells of roast chicken, green beans with almonds, and my famous apple pie made from the recipe my mother brought from Ireland. The dollar store provided paper plates to save on washing, but the love served on them was worth more than fine china. I'd set aside $20 each month for the grandchildren's birthday cards, sometimes skipping my coffee splurge to make sure I had enough. It wasn't much, but Emma would call excitedly about buying new books, and Jake would save every dollar in his dinosaur piggy bank, proudly announcing his growing total. This was my life, simple, predictable, filled with small joys and the security of routine. I didn't need adventure or excitement. I had my family, my memories, and the peace that comes from knowing you've lived a good life. I thought this gentle rhythm would carry me through to the end of my days. I never imagined it could all shatter with a single phone call. The phone rang on a Tuesday afternoon, which was unusual enough to make me pause. David always called in the evenings, and Susan rarely called at all. Our communication usually consisted of polite hellos during family gatherings and the occasional text about the children's schedules. I was folding laundry, trying to make my 2 good blouses last another season with careful pressing, when her name appeared on my ancient flip phone screen. "Hello, Susan dear," I answered, balancing the phone between my shoulder and ear while smoothing out a pillowcase. "Annie." Her voice was different, formal, like she was conducting a business meeting. She usually called me Mom, had insisted on it since the wedding. "I need you to keep Thursday evening free. We're having a family dinner." I set down the iron, giving her my full attention. Thursday? Our family dinners were always on Sundays, a tradition as solid as the foundation of my old apartment building. "Is everything all right? Is David okay? The children?" "Everyone's fine," she said quickly, but there was something rehearsed about her response. "We have an important announcement to make, and it needs to be Thursday, 7 o'clock sharp at Marcello's downtown." Marcello's. I knew the name from the society pages of newspapers I sometimes read at the library. It was the kind of place where water came in crystal glasses and bread wasn't free. The kind of place where my monthly grocery budget wouldn't cover an appetizer. My stomach tightened with a familiar anxiety, the one that came from being poor in rich spaces. Oh, Susan, that sounds lovely. But perhaps somewhere closer? You know I don't drive anymore. And the bus. We'll send an Uber, she interrupted, which was unlike her. Susan never interrupted. She was too polished for that. And Annie, please dress nicely. This is important. The words stung more than she probably intended. Or maybe she did intend it. I looked down at my house dress, faded but clean, then at my closet where 3 good dresses hung, my church dress, my funeral dress, and my special occasion dress, all at least 15 years old. Of course, dear, I'll wear my blue dress. The blue one? There was a pause, and I could hear muffled conversation in the background. Well, just do your best. It's a nice restaurant. You understand. I understood perfectly. I understood that my best would never be good enough for the circles Susan moved in. But this was family, and family meant swallowing your pride sometimes. Will David and the children be there? David will meet us there, she said, which struck me as odd. Why wouldn't they come together? The children are staying with the neighbors. This is more of an adult evening. Another red flag raised in my mind. Family announcements usually included the children. When Sarah announced her pregnancy, when Michael got his teaching position, the children were always there to celebrate. Emma and Jake were part of our family tapestry, not separate from it. Susan, dear, is this about something serious? You're worrying me a bit. I tried to keep my voice light, but 68 years of life had taught me to recognize when something was off-key. It's good news, Annie. Very good news. Just be there at 7. Don't be late. She paused, then added something that made my blood run cold despite the warm afternoon. Oh, and Annie, you might want to bring your reading glasses. There will be some papers to look at. Papers. In my experience, papers at fancy restaurants meant one of 3 things: business deals, legal troubles, or contracts. And Susan's tone suggested this wasn't about celebrating a business success. What kind of papers, Susan? Nothing to worry about. Just some family documentation, estate planning, that sort of thing. David thinks it's time we got everything organized. Her laugh was brittle, like ice cracking under pressure. You know how he is about being prepared. I did know how David was, and this didn't sound like him at all. My son believed in face-to-face conversations about important matters, usually over coffee at my kitchen table, not in restaurants I couldn't afford. I should talk to David first. He's in meetings all week, big project deadline. That's why I'm handling the arrangements. Thursday, 7 o'clock, Marcello's. The Uber will pick you up at 6:15. She hung up before I could protest further, leaving me standing in my living room with a half-pressed pillowcase and a growing sense of unease. Something was wrong. Every instinct developed over decades of protecting my family was screaming at me to pay attention. I spent the next 2 days convincing myself that my suspicions were nothing more than an old woman's paranoia. Standing in front of my bathroom mirror Wednesday night, I practiced smiling, telling myself stories that might explain Susan's strange behavior. Perhaps David had gotten a promotion, a big one that would require a formal announcement. Maybe they were planning to move closer to me, and Susan wanted to make it special. She could be pregnant again. That would explain the formality, the nice restaurant, the need for documentation if they were updating their wills. You're being silly, Annie, I told my reflection, noticing how the worry lines around my eyes had deepened since James passed. Susan is your daughter-in-law. She's family. She's the mother of your grandchildren. I thought about all the times Susan had included me, in her own way. The Christmas cards with professional photos where I was always positioned slightly to the side but still present. The Mother's Day brunches at her country club where she'd introduce me to her friends, even if she spoke a bit louder and slower, like I might not understand their conversations. The birthday gifts that were always practical, new slippers, a warm robe, things an elderly woman would need, as she'd said once. That night, I pulled out my special occasion dress, navy blue with small white flowers, purchased from Sears in 2008 for Michael's high school graduation. The fabric was still good quality, barely worn since I saved it for truly important moments. I spent an hour steaming out every wrinkle, my iron working overtime to make the dated dress look presentable. The hem had a small tear I'd mended 3 times, but if I walked carefully, no one would notice. Thursday morning arrived with unusual sunshine for October, which I took as a good sign. See? Everything would be fine. I treated myself to getting my hair done at Supercuts, spending $25 I'd saved from skipping my coffee treats. Marina, the stylist, worked magic with my thinning gray hair, creating soft curls that took years off my face. "Special occasion, Mrs. Morrison?" she asked, noticing I'd worn lipstick for the appointment. "Family dinner," I replied, pride creeping into my voice. "My daughter-in-law is taking me to Marcello's." Marina's eyes widened. "Fancy. You must be very close." "We are," I lied. Or maybe I was trying to speak it into existence. "Susan's wonderful. She just has a different way of showing affection. She's from a different generation, different background." I spent the afternoon preparing, polishing my grandmother's pearl necklace with a soft cloth until it gleamed. The pearls were the only valuable thing I owned, passed down through 3 generations of Morrison women. They'd survived the Depression, 2 wars, and countless family crises. Surely they could survive one dinner at a fancy restaurant. My white purse from Sarah's wedding was yellowed at the edges, but I cleaned it best I could with soap and water. Inside, I tucked $50, my emergency fund pulled from the envelope hidden behind the flour container, just in case the Uber driver needed cash, or there was coat check, or any of the dozen hidden costs that came with entering Susan's world. By 5 o'clock, I was fully dressed, sitting on the edge of my bed to avoid wrinkling the dress. I looked at the photo of James on my nightstand, his kind eyes seeming to watch me with concern. "I'm being paranoid," I whispered to his picture. "Susan can be thoughtless sometimes, but she's not cruel. She wouldn't hurt me on purpose. This is probably about something wonderful. Maybe they're finally going to take that family vacation we've talked about. Maybe they want me to come along." I thought about Emma and Jake, how their faces lit up when I walked into a room. Surely Susan saw that love, that connection. Surely she valued what I brought to the family beyond material wealth. I was their children's grandmother, the keeper of family stories, the one who remembered birthday cakes and favorite songs and how to cure hiccups with a spoonful of peanut butter. At 6:10, I stood by my window watching for the Uber, my reading glasses cleaned and tucked in my purse alongside the emergency money. My hands trembled slightly, but I attributed it to age and excitement, rather than the deep, instinctive fear that whispered warnings in my ear. "It's just dinner," I said aloud to the empty apartment, gathering my courage like armor. "Just a family dinner with an announcement. Everything is going to be fine." The black car pulled up exactly at 6:15, and I made my way downstairs, careful not to catch my dress on the broken banister. The driver barely looked at me as I climbed into the back seat, just confirmed the destination with a bored voice. As we drove toward downtown, toward the gleaming lights of restaurants I'd never enter on my own, I held my purse tight and continued my mantra of denial. Everything would be fine. It had to be. The Uber pulled up to Marcello's valet station, and immediately I knew I was out of my depth. Young men in crisp uniforms rushed to open doors for guests arriving in Mercedes and BMWs, while my driver had to honk to get their attention. When the valet finally approached, his eyes swept over me with a practiced assessment that landed somewhere between pity and dismissal. He opened my door with noticeably less enthusiasm than he'd shown the couple before me. "Welcome to Marcello's, ma'am," he said, already looking past me to the next arriving car. The restaurant entrance was all gleaming brass and etched glass, the kind of doors that seem to weigh your worth before allowing you entry. I pushed through them with determination, my purse clutched against my side like a shield. The interior hit me with immediate sensory overload: soft jazz, clinking crystal, the murmur of conversations about stock portfolios and vacation homes. The air itself smelled expensive, some combination of fresh flowers and truffle oil that made my simple perfume seem childish. "May I help you?" The hostess was perhaps 22, beautiful in that polished way that suggested weekly salon visits and a skincare routine worth more than my rent. Her smile was professional but cool, taking in my department store dress and worn shoes in one quick glance. "I'm meeting the Morrison party. Susan Morrison?" Her expression shifted slightly, a flicker of something, amusement, pity, crossing her features. "Ah, yes, Mrs. Morrison's table. They're already seated. Right this way." As we walked through the restaurant, I became painfully aware of every eye that glanced my way. My dress, which had looked perfectly respectable in my bedroom mirror, now felt like a costume from a community theater production. The other women wore sleek black dresses or elegant pantsuits, their jewelry catching the light from the chandeliers. My grandmother's pearls, which I'd been so proud of an hour ago, suddenly looked exactly what they were: old, inherited, trying too hard. Then I saw them. Susan sat at a large round table near the back, but not in the private dining room I'd expected for a family announcement. Instead, she was surrounded by 6 other people, all appearing to be in their 30s and 40s, all dressed like they'd stepped out of a fashion magazine. I recognized 2 of them vaguely, Susan's friends from her book club, though she'd never introduced us properly. There was no sign of David. Susan looked up as I approached, and for just a moment her mask slipped. I saw something in her eyes that made my stomach drop, anticipation mixed with something cruel, like a cat watching a mouse walk into a trap. She quickly rearranged her features into a bright smile, standing to greet me. "Annie, you made it!" Her voice carried across the dining room, unnecessarily loud. Several tables turned to look. "Everyone, this is David's mother I was telling you about. Not my mother-in-law, not Annie, just David's mother, like I was a footnote in someone else's story." The others at the table offered polite smiles and brief hellos before returning to their conversations. I noticed they all had drinks already, martinis and wine that probably cost more than my weekly grocery budget. Susan gestured to a chair at the far end of the table, separated from the main group by an empty seat. "We saved you a special place," she said, and one of her friends, a blonde woman wearing diamonds that could fund a college education, stifled a giggle. As I made my way to the chair, I heard whispered fragments of conversation. "Is that really her? The dress is actually vintage, isn't it? Susan, you weren't exaggerating." My place setting was the same as everyone else's, but somehow it felt different, isolated. The place card read Mrs. Morrison in elegant calligraphy, but someone had added a small next to it in pen, as if questioning whether I belonged there at all. I sat down carefully, trying not to let the chair scrape against the floor. A waiter appeared immediately for the others when they needed refills, but seemed to develop selective blindness when I tried to make eye contact. The menu, when finally handed to me, might as well have been written in a foreign language. Amuse-bouche, prix-fixe, molecular gastronomy. The prices weren't listed, which in my experience meant they were too expensive to print. "Don't worry about the menu," Susan said, her voice carrying that false sweetness I was beginning to recognize. "I've already ordered for the table. I know how overwhelming these places can be for you." The blonde friend leaned forward, her smile sharp as her diamonds. "Susan tells us you live in such a quaint little apartment. How charming that must be. So much simpler than dealing with large homes." "And you still take the bus everywhere?" another added. "How environmentally conscious of you." They weren't compliments. Every word dripped with condescension, turning my life into entertainment for their amusement. Susan sat back, watching it all unfold with satisfaction. This wasn't a family dinner. This was something else entirely, and I was starting to understand that I wasn't a guest. I was the evening's entertainment. The appetizers arrived, tiny portions of something unrecognizable on plates large enough to serve a full meal. Susan's friends continued their conversation about recent vacations to places I'd only seen in travel magazines. deliberately speaking over me whenever I attempted to contribute. But it was during the main course that the real humiliation began. "Annie," Susan said suddenly, her voice cutting through the chatter like a silver knife, "why don't you tell everyone about your dress? It's quite the conversation piece." Every eye at the table turned to me. I felt heat rise in my cheeks, my hands trembling slightly as I set down my fork. "It's just a dress I've had for some years." "Some years?" Susan laughed, the sound tinkling and false. "Be honest, Annie. That dress is older than my marriage to David, isn't it? Maybe older than some of the waiters here?" The blonde woman, I'd learned her name was Victoria, leaned forward with mock interest. "Vintage is so in right now. Where did you get it? An estate sale? Goodwill?" "Sears," I said quietly, lifting my chin slightly. 2008. My son Michael's graduation. The table erupted in barely concealed laughter. Susan's friend Marcus, a man who'd spent the entire evening discussing his yacht, actually took out his phone to calculate something. 2008, that dress is 16 years old. That's incredible. I don't think I own anything from last season. "Well," Susan interjected, her voice dripping with false sympathy, "not everyone can afford to update their wardrobe. Annie lives on a very fixed income. Very, very fixed. What is it again, Annie? Social Security and that tiny pension?" I wanted to disappear, to melt into the expensive carpeting beneath my feet. But worse was coming. Susan pulled out her phone, swiping through photos with theatrical gestures. "Look at this," she said, showing her screen to the table. "This is Annie's apartment. Can you believe people still live like this? The building is from the 1960s, still has those old radiators that clang all night." They were photos from last month when I'd babysat Emma while she was sick. Susan had come to pick her up and asked to use my bathroom. She must have taken pictures then. My modest living room, my small kitchen with its aged appliances, even my bedroom visible through the doorway. Private spaces exposed for public mockery. "The bathroom is my favorite," Susan continued, showing another photo. "That bathtub has those rust stains that never come out, and the tiles, oh, the tiles are actually falling off the walls." Victoria gasped in exaggerated horror. "How do you live like that? I'd simply die." "Not everyone has choices," Susan said, her eyes meeting mine with calculated cruelty. "Some people just exist. They go through life taking up space, contributing nothing, just aging." The waiter approached then, carrying a silver tray with an envelope. But instead of handing it to Susan, he paused, looking uncertain. "Mrs. Susan Morrison?" "Yes," Susan said, her attention momentarily diverted from tormenting me. She looked pleased, probably expecting some special dessert presentation she'd arranged. "This was requested to be delivered to you during the meal," the waiter said, placing the envelope before her. Susan picked it up with confidence, her manicured nails slicing through the paper. "Oh, this must be the surprise I mentioned." She stopped mid-sentence, her face draining of color as she read the contents. "What is it?" Victoria asked, craning her neck to see. Susan's hands began to shake. The document trembled in her grip, and I could see official letterhead, legal language, and at the bottom, what appeared to be her signature. Her eyes darted across the page, growing wider with each line. This can't be," she whispered, her earlier bravado evaporating like morning mist. "Susan," Marcus prompted, "what's wrong?" She looked up at me then, and for the first time all evening there was real fear in her eyes. "You knew," she breathed. "You knew about this?" I shook my head, genuinely confused. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't play innocent." Her voice cracked, rising in pitch. "This is about the house, isn't it? The property." The table fell silent. Victoria and the others exchanged uncertain glances. Their entertainment suddenly transformed into something uncomfortably real. Susan's perfectly composed facade was crumbling before our eyes, tears starting to streak her expertly applied makeup. "What property?" Victoria asked. "Susan, what's going on?" But Susan wasn't listening. She was staring at the papers, her lips moving soundlessly as she read and reread something that had shattered her world as completely as she'd tried to shatter mine. The predator had become prey, and I didn't yet understand how or why. The document slipped from her fingers, floating to the table like a white flag of surrender. Through her tears, she looked around the table at her friends, her co-conspirators in my humiliation, and realized that whatever was in that letter had changed everything. "David knows," she whispered, and those two words carried the weight of a confession. Susan's tears weren't from remorse. They were from being caught. As she sat there shaking, Victoria picked up the document that had fallen onto the table. Her eyes widened as she scanned it, then she quickly set it down as if it burned her fingers. "Susan," Victoria said slowly, "this says you've been building a case for power of attorney, that you've been documenting evidence of Annie's mental decline?" The words hit me like physical blows. Mental decline. I thought back to all of Susan's recent behaviors that suddenly took on sinister meaning. The repeated questions about whether I'd remembered to take medications I didn't even need. The concerned looks when I couldn't immediately recall a date or name. The way she'd started asking the same questions multiple times, then acted worried when I pointed out she'd already asked. "You've been keeping records," I said, my voice surprisingly steady despite the horror washing over me. "All those visits, those concerned check-ins." Susan wiped at her mascara-streaked face, but her expression was hardening again, calculating her next move. "You don't understand the full situation, Annie. You never have. That's part of the problem." Marcus cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Susan, maybe we should—" "Shut up, Marcus," Susan snapped, her polished veneer cracking completely. "You were all happy enough to come tonight to laugh at her, to be part of this. Don't pretend you're innocent now." "Part of what?" I asked, though the picture was becoming clearer with each passing second. Susan laughed bitterly. "You really don't know, do you? Sitting there in your pathetic apartment, living your simple little life, completely oblivious to what you're sitting on." Victoria shifted in her seat. "Susan, this is getting out of hand." "The house!" Susan practically shrieked, causing nearby tables to turn and stare. Her sister's house in Riverside Heights, the one she inherited 6 months ago and never told anyone about. My blood ran cold. Aunt Margaret's house. I had inherited it when she passed, but I'd kept it quiet, unsure what to do with the property. It needed work, and I'd been slowly going through Margaret's belongings on weekends, not ready to make any decisions. I hadn't even told David yet, planning to discuss it with him after I'd processed the grief of losing my last sibling. "How did you—" "Public records, Annie, it's all public record." Susan's smile was ugly now, twisted with greed and frustration. "A 4-bedroom colonial in Riverside Heights. Do you have any idea what that's worth? The neighborhood is being developed, boutique shops, luxury condos. That decrepit old house is sitting on a gold mine." The pieces were falling into place with sickening clarity. "You were going to declare me incompetent." "It should have been simple," Susan said, her voice taking on a manic edge. 6 months of documentation. Dr. Harrison, you remember him from the country club, was ready to provide a supporting evaluation. The lawyers said, with family support and medical documentation, we could have had conservatorship within weeks. We? I looked around the table. Victoria wouldn't meet my eyes. Marcus was studying his wine glass. Susan's other friends were all finding fascinating things to examine in their laps. They were going to be character witnesses, Susan explained, waving dismissively at her friends. Concerned family friends who'd noticed your decline. Tonight was supposed to be the final piece. Public evidence of your confusion, your inability to function in social settings. Victoria was recording on her phone. I saw Victoria quickly shove her phone into her purse, her face flushing red. The plan was perfect, Susan continued, lost in her own fury now. Put you in Sunshine Manor. They have that Medicaid wing, perfect for someone of your means. Sell the house to cover your care costs. The rest would go into a trust that I would manage, for your own good, of course. Sunshine Manor? I knew the place. It was where people went to be forgotten, understaffed, and overlooked, where residents sat in wheelchairs lining hallways like abandoned furniture. It's not that bad, Susan said defensively. They have activities. Bingo twice a week. You were going to steal my inheritance and lock me away. The words came out flat, emotionless. I was beyond anger, beyond hurt. This was evil, pure and calculated. It's not stealing when it's family money being properly managed, Susan protested. That house is worth $800,000, Annie. $800,000. And you were just going to what? Let it sit there? Keep living in that apartment, clipping coupons, acting like poverty is some kind of virtue? That money could have set up Emma and Jake's college funds, could have secured David's future. Instead, you'd probably leave it all to charity or your church, wouldn't you? Waste it on people who aren't even family. David, I said suddenly, the signature on those papers. David found out. Susan's face crumbled again. I don't know how. I was so careful. The lawyer. Everything was confidential. But somehow he knew. He's known for weeks, apparently. Hired a private investigator. Found out about... She stopped abruptly, clamping her mouth shut. Found out about what, Susan? But she was done talking, staring at the document as tears continued to fall. No longer the crocodile tears of manipulation, but real, desperate fear of someone watching their carefully constructed life collapse. The reality of Susan's betrayal hit me in waves, each revelation crashing over me with increasing force. I excused myself from the table, my legs barely supporting me as I made my way to the ladies' room. The attendant, because of course this restaurant had a bathroom attendant, looked at me with genuine concern as I gripped the marble counter, staring at my reflection in the ornate mirror. The woman looking back at me seemed to have aged 10 years in one evening. My carefully styled hair now looked pathetic, trying too hard to recapture youth that had long since fled. The pearls around my neck, my grandmother's pearls that had survived the Depression, felt like they were choking me. I thought of her, surviving on potato soup to feed her children, and wondered what she would think of her great-granddaughter-in-law plotting to steal our family legacy. The memories came flooding back, each one taking on a darker meaning in light of tonight's revelations. Susan asking about my daily routine, pretending it was concern, but actually documenting whether I could manage independently. The time she found me crying on James's birthday and asked repeatedly if I felt confused about time or forgot he was gone. I had been grieving, not demented, but she'd written it all down somewhere in her horrible little file. I remembered 3 months ago when she'd brought a friend to coffee, Dr. Harrison apparently. He'd asked casual questions about my health, my medications, whether I ever felt dizzy or forgot things. I'd thought he was just a nice man making conversation. Instead, he'd been evaluating me like livestock at auction, determining if I was weak enough to slaughter. And the children. Oh God, Emma and Jake. How many times had Susan prompted them to tell her if Grandma seemed different or forgot things? She'd been using my own grandchildren as spies, turning their innocent observations into weapons against me. Last week, Jake had mentioned that Mommy asked if I ever seemed confused when we played games. I'd laughed it off, but now I understood. She was poisoning them against me, slowly, carefully. I thought about the house, Margaret's house. I'd kept it secret not from greed but from grief. Margaret and I had grown up in that house, spent summers on its wraparound porch drinking lemonade our mother made from scratch. The walls held decades of family memories, pencil marks tracking heights, crayon masterpieces hidden behind furniture, the burn mark on the kitchen floor from when Margaret tried to cook Thanksgiving turkey at age 12. I'd been going there on Sundays after church, sitting in Margaret's sewing room, sorting through boxes of photographs and letters. Letters from our mother during the war, from cousins now long dead, from James during our courtship. I wasn't ready to make decisions about the house because I wasn't ready to let go of the last physical connection to my siblings, all now gone. But to Susan, it was just money. $800,000 that she felt entitled to because she'd married my son. She'd never asked about Margaret, never offered condolences when she passed, never wondered why I sometimes seemed sad on Sundays. She'd only seen dollar signs and opportunity. The bathroom door opened, and Victoria entered, her heels clicking on the marble floor. She avoided eye contact, disappearing into a stall, but I heard her on the phone, whispering urgently to someone about getting out of this mess and never agreeing to anything on record. I splashed cold water on my face, not caring that it would ruin what little makeup I'd applied. In the mirror, I saw myself clearly for perhaps the first time in years. Not the devoted grandmother, not the helpful mother-in-law, not the grateful elderly woman, happy for any crumb of attention. I saw a woman who had been targeted, groomed for victimhood, nearly destroyed by someone she'd welcomed into her family. The sobs came then, great heaving gasps that echoed off the bathroom walls. The attendant approached with tissues, patting my shoulder gently. "Ma'am, are you all right? Should I call someone?" I almost laughed at the irony. Who would she call? My son, whose wife had orchestrated this nightmare. My grandchildren, who'd been turned into unwitting accomplices. The friends I'd gradually lost touch with because I was always babysitting, always available for Susan's needs. "No," I managed between sobs. "There's no one to call." But even as I said it, I realized it wasn't true. David knew. Somehow, my son had discovered the truth. The document delivered to Susan proved he was fighting back, though I didn't yet understand how or why he'd waited until tonight to reveal his hand. I dried my eyes, straightened my 16-year-old dress, and looked at myself once more in the mirror. The woman staring back was broken, but not beaten, wounded, but not dead. I thought of my mother, who'd raised 6 children during the Depression. Of my grandmother who'd crossed an ocean alone at 17 with nothing but hope. Of all the Morrison women who'd faced hardship with spine straight and chin high. Susan thought I was weak because I was old, vulnerable because I was poor. She was about to learn that there's strength in surviving, power in endurance, and that a woman who's buried a husband and raised 3 children alone doesn't break easily. I walked back to the dining room, my grandmother's pearls catching the light like armor. I returned to the table to find chaos. Susan was frantically making phone calls, her voice high and desperate. Her friends were gathering their things, clearly eager to distance themselves from whatever was unfolding. The waiter stood awkwardly to the side, unsure whether to clear plates or bring dessert to a party that was obviously imploding. As I took my seat, I noticed something I'd missed before. A second page of the document Susan had received, face down beside her wine glass. While she was distracted with her phone, arguing with someone about breach of confidentiality and marital privilege, I quietly reached over and turned it over. My son's handwriting jumped out at me, a personal note attached to the legal document. "Mom, I'm handling this. Don't worry anymore. David." Those 8 words changed everything. My son knew. My son was protecting me. The boy I'd raised while working 2 jobs, who'd watched me mend clothes by lamplight to save money for his college books, who'd promised at his father's funeral that he'd take care of me. That boy had become a man who kept his promises. Susan ended her call and turned to me, her face blotchy and swollen. "You must be so proud," she spat. "Your precious David going behind his wife's back, hiring investigators like we're criminals. Aren't you?" The words came out stronger than I expected. What else do you call someone who tries to steal from the elderly, who plans to lock away an innocent woman for money? Victoria gasped. "Susan, we should go." "Sit down," I commanded, and surprisingly, she did. Something in my voice had changed, shifted from victim to matriarch. "All of you, sit." They sat, These successful, polished people in their designer clothes, cowed by an old woman in a dress from Sears. I stood slowly, my hands steady now, my voice clear. You think because I'm old, I'm weak, because I'm poor, I'm worthless. You sat here tonight laughing at my dress, mocking my apartment, turning my life into entertainment. I looked each of them in the eye. But what you don't understand is that everything you mocked made me who I am. This dress? I bought it with money I saved by eating ramen for weeks so my son could have new shoes for his job interview. My apartment? It's where I raised 3 successful children after my husband died, where I taught them that integrity matters more than income. Marcus shifted uncomfortably. Mrs. Morrison, we didn't know. You knew enough to come here tonight to witness my humiliation. You knew enough to record it. I turned to Victoria. Yes, I know about the phone. Did you get good footage? Will it play well when David's lawyer subpoenas it? The color drained from Victoria's face. But here's what you didn't know, I continued, finding strength in each word. You didn't know that every sacrifice I made taught my children to recognize love from exploitation. You didn't know that while Susan was documenting my supposed decline, David was documenting her betrayal. You didn't know that the woman you tried to destroy raised a son smart enough to protect her. Susan stood abruptly. I want a divorce. I'll take David for everything he's worth. I laughed then, actually laughed. With what leverage, Susan? The affair with your business partner? The credit cards you opened? In David's name? The money you've been siphoning from his business account? Susan froze. How could you possibly? I don't know the details, I admitted, but I know my son. He doesn't do anything halfway. If he hired an investigator, if he set this trap tonight, then he found everything, every secret, every lie, every betrayal. I picked up my purse, my grandmother's pearls warm against my throat. You made one fatal mistake, Susan. You confused kindness with weakness. You thought because I chose to live simply, I was simple. But I've survived things that would break you. I've buried loved ones, raised children alone, built a life from ashes, and I did it all without lying, cheating, or stealing from anyone. The waiter approached hesitantly. Should I bring the dessert menu? No, I said firmly, but you can bring the check. Make sure it goes to Mrs. Susan Morrison. After all, she insisted on hosting this lovely family dinner. Susan's face went pale as she realized the cost of the evening, her friends' drinks, the expensive wine, the overpriced food, would all fall on her. The same woman who'd been planning to steal hundreds of thousands from me would now have to pay for the dinner where her plans crumbled. This isn't over, Susan hissed. Yes, I said quietly. It is, because I'm not the victim in your story anymore. I'm the survivor, and survivors fight back. I walked toward the exit, each step steadier than the last. Behind me, I heard Susan's friends making excuses, distancing themselves, abandoning her as quickly as rats flee a sinking ship. But I didn't look back. Morrison women never do. Outside Marcello's, I found David waiting by his car, his face drawn with exhaustion but his eyes bright with determination. He rushed to embrace me, and I felt him shake slightly as he held me tight. This strong man who'd discovered his wife's betrayal, reduced to a trembling boy needing his mother's comfort. I'm so sorry, Mom, he whispered against my hair. I should have seen it sooner. I should have protected you from the beginning. How long have you known? I asked, pulling back to look at his face. 6 weeks, he admitted, leading me to his car. Jake mentioned something innocent. How Mommy had a special notebook where she wrote things about Grandma. He thought it was sweet, like a memory book. But something felt wrong. Susan never kept journals, never was sentimental like that. We sat in his car, and David pulled out a folder thick with documents. His hands were steady now, the hands of a man who'd spent weeks carefully building a case against the woman he'd once loved. I found the notebook hidden in her home office, he continued. Page after page of manufactured evidence. times you supposedly forgot things, conversations twisted to seem confused, normal aging moments transformed into signs of dementia. She even had photos, pictures of your medicine cabinet, your bills, your apartment, all annotated with comments about your declining ability to maintain a safe environment. He showed me a photograph she'd taken of my kitchen. My morning pills were laid out on the counter, just vitamins and blood pressure medication. But she'd captioned it, "Multiple medications scattered, possible confusion about dosage." "That's when I hired Patricia," David said, pulling out a business card. "Patricia Chen, private investigator. Former FBI, specializes in financial fraud and elder abuse cases." "David, that must have cost—" "Mom, stop, just stop." His voice was fierce. "You worked yourself to the bone for us. You think I'd let someone hurt you over money?" He took a shaky breath. "Patricia found everything. Susan's affair with her business partner, Marcus Wellington. Yes, the same Marcus at dinner tonight. They've been together for 2 years, planning to divorce me once they had control of your house sale proceeds. The betrayal went even deeper than I'd imagined. She was going to leave you anyway? The house was going to be their seed money for a new company, but that's not the worst part." David pulled out another document. "She's been stealing from my business. Small amounts, careful transfers, but it adds up to nearly $60,000 over 3 years. She used it for her lifestyle, the designer clothes, the country club membership, the trips with her friends that she said were business conferences. And you've been building a case all this time? Every piece of evidence legally obtained, every document verified. Patricia is thorough." He smiled grimly. "But I needed Susan to make her move, to actually attempt the conservatorship filing. Tonight was perfect. Multiple witnesses to her admission, her friends' involvement, the whole conspiracy laid bare. The restaurant choice wasn't random either, was it?" David's smile became genuine for the first time. "Marcello himself is my client. I helped him with a trademark dispute last year. When I explained the situation, he insisted on helping. Every waiter was briefed. Security cameras were positioned to capture the entire dinner, and he personally ensured the document was delivered at the perfect moment. But how did you know she'd choose tonight?" "I didn't. I've been ready for 3 weeks. Patricia's been tracking Susan's communications, legally through our shared phone plan that I pay for. When Susan started messaging her friends about tonight's hilarious dinner show, we knew. The document I had delivered was her actual conservatorship filing that she'd submitted to her lawyer. I had Patricia obtain a copy through a connection at the courthouse. Seeing her own signature, her own cruel words, that was supposed to be her wake-up call." He paused, his expression darkening. "But there's more, Mom. The house in Riverside Heights. I need you to know something." My heart sank. "What about it?" "Nothing bad," he assured me quickly. "But I've had it under surveillance. Susan's been there, Mom, multiple times. She had copies made of your keys when she helped you after Aunt Margaret's funeral. She's been going through everything, taking photographs, even had a realtor come for a private assessment." The violation felt fresh, imagining Susan pawing through Margaret's things, my family memories, treating them like inventory to be liquidated. "We have her on video," David continued. "Breaking and entering, criminal trespass, attempted grand theft. The prosecutor says with elder abuse charges added, she's looking at serious jail time if we pursue criminal charges." "Do you want to pursue them?" David's jaw tightened. "That depends on you, Mom. But first, we need to make sure you're safe. Tomorrow morning, we're filing restraining orders. Patricia has already changed the locks on Margaret's house, and I've hired security to check on your apartment. Susan's going to be served divorce papers by morning, and her assets are being frozen as we speak. The children are with my neighbor tonight. I told them Mommy had to go on a sudden business trip. We'll figure out how to explain it properly with a child therapist's help. But Mom, I need you to know something." He took my hands in his. "Emma and Jake love you. Nothing Susan did or said could change that. Last week, Emma asked if you could teach her to make your apple pie because, Grandma's love is the secret ingredient. They see you, Mom. The real you. I started crying then, not from sadness, but from relief. My son had built an entire legal fortress around me while I'd thought I was alone. The next morning arrived with the kind of dramatic flair Susan would have appreciated had she not been at the center of it. David had moved me to a hotel for the night. Nothing fancy, but clean and safe, with a security guard he'd hired stationed discreetly in the lobby. At exactly 8 a.m., his phone began buzzing with updates from Patricia and his legal team. "She's been served," David announced, reading from his phone. "Divorce papers, restraining order, and a cease and desist regarding any contact with you. Her lawyer, the one who was helping with the conservatorship, just dropped her as a client." Within an hour, my phone started ringing. Susan's friends, the same ones who'd laughed at me last night, were calling one by one. I didn't answer, but their voicemails told the story of rats fleeing a sinking ship. Victoria left a stammering message about how she'd had no idea about Susan's real intentions. Marcus's wife called, furious, having just learned about her husband's affair. But the real drama was scheduled for 2 p.m. at the offices of Brennan, Hecht and Associates, where Susan worked as a senior marketing director. David had arranged for several things to happen simultaneously. A carefully orchestrated finale to Susan's charade. We arrived early, sitting in David's car across from the building's main entrance. Patricia was already there in a van with tinted windows, recording everything. At 1:45, a process server entered the building. At 1:50, 2 police officers followed. At 1:55, employees began gathering at the windows, drawn by some commotion inside. "What exactly is happening in there?" I asked David. "The process server is delivering a civil suit for fraud and embezzlement to Susan at her workplace. The police are there with a warrant to collect evidence from her office regarding the criminal charges, and..." He checked his watch. "Right about now, HR is presenting her with termination papers." "They're firing her?" "Marcello's nephew is on their board of directors. When he heard what happened last night, he called an emergency meeting this morning. Turns out Susan's been using company resources for her personal schemes. The printer for her fake documents, company time for her meetings with lawyers, even charged your evaluation meetings to her corporate credit card as client entertainment." At 2:15, the building's doors burst open. Susan emerged, escorted by security guards, carrying a banker's box of her possessions. Her usually perfect hair was disheveled, her makeup streaked with tears and mascara. The designer suit she wore, probably worth more than my monthly rent, looked wrinkled and defeated. A small crowd had gathered, drawn by the police cars and the spectacle. Among them, I spotted several of her colleagues, people she'd probably boasted to about her rich husband and perfect life. They watched with a mixture of shock and satisfaction as security deposited her on the sidewalk. Susan stood there clutching her box, looking around wildly until her eyes landed on David's car. She started walking toward us, her heels clicking aggressively on the pavement, but stopped when Patricia stepped out of her van, camera in hand. "Don't come any closer, Susan," David called through his open window. "The restraining order is in effect." "You did this!" she screamed, her voice cracking. "You destroyed my life. Over what? Some old woman who doesn't even matter?" I opened my door and stood, facing her across the street. "I matter to the people who love me," I said, my voice carrying clearly. "I mattered enough for you to spend months plotting against me." A news van pulled up, Patricia's doing, no doubt. The reporter, a young woman with keen eyes, approached Susan with a microphone. "Mrs. Morrison, is it true you've been charged with elder abuse and attempted financial exploitation?" Susan's face went white. No comment. "What about the allegations of adultery and embezzlement?" "I said no comment," Susan shrieked, trying to push past the reporter. But more people were gathering. Someone from the crowd, I recognized him as the waiter from Marcello's, called out, "That's the woman who tried to steal from her mother-in-law. It's all over social media." David showed me his phone. The restaurant's security footage had been legally released after Susan's admission of guilt. The video of her crying over the documents confessing to her scheme had already been viewed thousands of times. The comments were brutal but unanimous in their condemnation. She planned to put that sweet old lady in a home. The grandmother was so dignified while this witch tormented her. Hope she gets jail time. Susan tried to call someone on her phone, but from her frustrated expression, no one was answering. Her parents, who David had contacted that morning with the full story, had already issued a statement distancing themselves. Her brother, a pastor in Ohio, had been particularly disgusted by her actions. The police officers emerged from the building carrying several evidence boxes. One approached Susan. "Mrs. Morrison, we need you to come to the station for questioning." "I'm not going anywhere without my lawyer." "That's your right, ma'am, but you'll need to come with us either way." As they led her to the police car, Susan turned back one more time. Her carefully constructed world had collapsed in less than 24 hours. The designer clothes, the country club membership, the successful career, all gone. As Susan was being placed in the police car, Patricia approached us with her tablet, a slight smile on her usually serious face. "There's something else you need to see," she said, pulling up a video file. "This morning, while executing the warrant at Susan's office, we found something unexpected." The video showed Susan's office, but it was what was on her computer screen that made David gasp. It was a website, a crude mock-up titled "Annie's Decline: A Family's Struggle with Dementia." Susan had been planning to launch a blog complete with the photos she'd taken of my apartment, recordings of our conversations, and even a GoFundMe page. She was going to crowdfund? I asked, incredulous. "Look at the target amount," Patricia pointed, $50,000, for Annie's specialized memory care. The bank account linked to it goes directly to an offshore account in Susan's name only. David's face darkened. She wasn't just going to steal the house, she was going to profit from Mom's supposed illness. But Patricia wasn't done. We found emails to a literary agent. She was pitching a book, Loving Through Loss, a daughter-in-law's journey through elder care. She'd already written 3 chapters, painting herself as a saint, sacrificing everything to care for you. The betrayal kept deepening, each revelation more grotesque than the last. But then Patricia showed us something that changed everything. "This email chain is from 2 weeks ago," she said, scrolling through messages. "Susan wasn't working alone. Look at the recipients." The emails included not just Marcus and Victoria, but 12 other people, all members of what Susan called her investment circle. They'd each contributed $5,000 to fund the legal proceedings, with the promise of a return from the house sale. "They were all investors?" David asked, stunned. "It was a syndicate," Patricia confirmed. "Susan promised them a 200% return within 6 months. She marketed it as a gray market opportunity in elderly asset management. We have their signed agreements, their bank transfers, everything." The news reporter, who'd been lingering nearby, overheard this. "Excuse me? Are you saying this was an organized crime ring targeting the elderly?" Patricia looked at David, who nodded. "We have evidence of at least 3 other elderly people they were researching," Patricia told the reporter, "all widowed, all with property, all with adult children who trusted the wrong people." The reporter's eyes lit up with the kind of excitement that comes from stumbling onto a major story. Within minutes, she was doing a live broadcast right there on the sidewalk, with the office building as her backdrop. This is Jennifer Walsh reporting live, where what started as a family dispute has exploded into allegations of an organized conspiracy to defraud elderly citizens. Sources confirm that Susan Morrison, arrested moments ago, was allegedly running what authorities are calling an elder exploitation syndicate. My phone started ringing. Unknown numbers, reporters who'd somehow gotten my information. David fielded them while I stood there, absorbing the magnitude of what had been planned. I wasn't just a victim. I was meant to be the test case, the proof of concept for a larger operation. Then Marcus Wellington arrived, stepping out of a Mercedes with his lawyer. He saw the cameras and tried to retreat, but Jennifer Walsh was already approaching with her microphone. Mr. Wellington, what's your response to allegations that you invested in a scheme to defraud Annie Morrison? No comment, he muttered, but his face on camera told the whole story: guilt, fear, and the dawning realization that his comfortable life was over. Victoria appeared next, mascara running, designer bag clutched to her chest. "It wasn't supposed to be like this," she cried to anyone who would listen. "Susan said it was legal. She said the old woman wouldn't even notice." The old woman stood taller. These people had reduced me to a line item in their investment portfolio, a problem to be solved for profit. But now they were the ones being reduced to defendants, to criminals, to cautionary tales. Dr. Harrison from the country club arrived in handcuffs, having been arrested at his practice. The medical board had already suspended his license pending investigation. It turned out he'd provided evaluations for 2 other elderly people in Susan's research files, declaring them incompetent without proper examination. As the afternoon wore on, more arrivals painted a picture of systematic evil: a lawyer who'd prepared fraudulent documents, a real estate agent who'd already found buyers for Margaret's house, a nursing home administrator who'd reserved a Medicaid bed for me with a kickback to Susan. The final twist came when Patricia pulled up one last document on her tablet: an email from Susan to Marcus, sent just last night, after she'd been exposed at the restaurant. "Plan B," it read. "If tonight fails, we frame Annie for Margaret's death. I have access to the house. We plant evidence. Confused old woman accidentally poisoned her sister, needs immediate institutionalization." My knees nearly buckled. They would have made me a murderer. They would have destroyed not just my freedom, but my entire life's reputation, the memory my grandchildren would carry of me. David caught me, held me steady. "We got them, Mom. All of them. They'll never hurt anyone again." The police car carrying Susan pulled away, and as it did, she turned to look through the rear window. Our eyes met one last time, the predator caged, the prey standing free. But I didn't feel victorious. I felt tired, sad, and strangely empty. Evil had worn the face of family, had sat at my table, had kissed my cheek while planning my destruction. 6 months later, I stood in the courthouse hallway, my hand resting on David's arm for support, not because I was weak, but because we were stronger together. The final sentencing was about to begin, and the corridors buzzed with reporters, lawyers, and others whose lives had been touched by what the media now called the Morrison Syndicate case. Susan entered the courtroom in handcuffs wearing a simple gray pantsuit, a far cry from her designer wardrobe, which had been liquidated to pay restitution. She'd lost weight, her face gaunt, her perfectly styled hair now pulled back in a simple ponytail. For a moment, our eyes met, and I saw something I'd never seen before: genuine remorse, or perhaps just regret at being caught. The judge, Honorable Patricia Hawkins, read the verdict with measured authority. Susan Morrison, on the counts of conspiracy to commit elder abuse, attempted grand theft, fraud, and conspiracy to commit false imprisonment, this court finds you guilty on all charges. The sentence was 8 years in state prison, with possibility of parole in 5. The courtroom erupted in whispers, but I felt no joy, only a deep sadness for what could have been. David squeezed my hand as Susan was led away. She didn't look back. Marcus Wellington received 6 years for fraud and conspiracy. Victoria Chen got 18 months and 500 hours of community service at senior centers, the judge's idea of poetic justice. Dr. Harrison lost his medical license permanently and received 3 years for medical fraud. In total, 14 people were convicted in connection with the syndicate. But justice wasn't just about punishment. It was about restoration. The civil suits David filed on my behalf resulted in significant settlements. The investors had to forfeit their contributions, which, combined with the other settlements, created a fund of nearly $300,000. I didn't want it. It felt like blood money. But David helped me understand that this money could help others. We established the Margaret Morrison Foundation for Elder Protection, named after my sister, whose house had nearly been the instrument of my destruction. The foundation provides free legal services to elderly people facing exploitation and funds surprise audits at nursing homes suspected of abuse. In its first 3 months, we'd already helped 12 families. Margaret's house was eventually sold, by my choice, at my timing, to a young family with 3 children who reminded me of us in our early days. The mother was a teacher, the father a carpenter, and they promised to maintain Margaret's garden. I kept enough from the sale to move into a better apartment, one with working heat and windows that actually sealed, and put the rest toward my grandchildren's college funds. Emma and Jake were the unexpected heroes in their own way. The divorce had been hard on them, but with the help of an excellent child therapist, they'd come to understand the truth in age-appropriate ways. Emma wrote an essay for school about standing up to bullies, even when the bully is someone you love. Jake, in his 8-year-old wisdom, simply said, "Grandma, Mom was mean to you. That's not okay. Want to make cookies?" David had primary custody now, with Susan getting supervised visitation once a week. She'd tried to poison them against me during those visits at first, but the court-appointed supervisor put a stop to that immediately. Slowly, she seemed to be accepting her new reality. My son had changed too. The betrayal had hardened something in him, but it had also opened his eyes. He visited more often, not out of duty, but out of desire. Sunday dinners moved to his house, a proper dining room table where no one sat at the far end, where no one mocked anyone's clothes, where love was served with every meal. The community response had been overwhelming. After the news coverage, I received hundreds of letters from other elderly people who'd faced similar exploitation, though perhaps not as organized. We started a support group that met monthly at the community center. Sharing our stories, we found strength in numbers and wisdom in our shared experiences. Mr. Rodriguez from 2B turned out to be a retired attorney and offered to help review legal documents for elderly residents in our building, pro bono. Mrs. Chen, my neighbor with the loud television, became my daily coffee companion, and we discovered we'd both been widowed the same year. The building that had once felt like a place to merely exist became a community. One unexpected resolution came in the form of a letter from Susan's parents. They were deeply ashamed of their daughter's actions and wanted to make amends. They started visiting monthly, bringing the children to see their other grandparents, trying to maintain some family connection despite the fracture Susan had created. David eventually started dating again, a pediatric nurse named Carol, who treated me with genuine warmth and respect. She didn't call attention to my modest clothes or simple apartment. She simply sat at my kitchen table, drank tea from my old cups, and asked about the stories behind the photographs on my mantel. The insurance company that held Susan's professional liability policy paid out a significant sum when it was revealed she'd used company resources for her crimes. Her former employer donated it entirely to elder care charities, wanting to distance themselves from the scandal. As I stood in my new apartment 6 months later, surrounded by the same old photographs in their mismatched frames, but now in a space with reliable heating and windows that kept out the draft, I reflected on the journey. The morning sun streams through my new apartment windows as I water the plants on my balcony. Not just herbs now, but flowers too, bright geraniums that remind me of the ones my mother grew. It's been a year since that horrible dinner at Marcello's, and I'm standing here in the same blue dress with the small white flowers. Yes, the same one Susan and her friends mocked, now worn as a badge of honor. Emma sits at my kitchen table, carefully copying my apple pie recipe into a notebook decorated with stickers. "Grandma," she says, looking up with those serious 12-year-old eyes, "Mom tried to hurt you because of money, didn't she?" I sit down beside her, choosing my words carefully. "Your mom lost sight of what really matters, sweetheart. She forgot that money is just paper and numbers, but family, real family, is irreplaceable." "Like your dress," Emma says unexpectedly. "Mom always said it was old and embarrassing. but you wore it to Dad's graduation and my first piano recital and Jake's kindergarten play. That dress has more love in it than all her designer clothes combined. Sometimes children see truth more clearly than adults ever could. This story could have ended differently. I could have been one of the thousands of elderly people who disappear into institutions, deemed incompetent by family members who see them as burdens or bank accounts rather than human beings with dignity and dreams. The National Center on Elder Abuse reports that financial exploitation by family members accounts for 60% of elder abuse cases, with losses exceeding $2.9 billion annually. Behind every statistic is someone like me, a mother, grandmother, survivor, reduced to a problem to be solved. But here's what I've learned. Evil dressed in familiar faces is still evil. When someone shows you who they really are, through their actions, not their words, believe them the first time. The red flags I ignored weren't just warning signs. They were sirens. Susan's subtle cruelties, her embarrassment of my circumstances, her calculation of my worth in dollars rather than love, these were all preludes to betrayal. The measure of a society isn't how it treats its strongest members, but how it protects its most vulnerable. Our elderly carry the wisdom of generations, the stories of our families, the love that shaped us into who we are. They deserve respect, not exploitation. They deserve dignity, not dismissal. They deserve to live their final chapters in peace, not fear. To those watching who see themselves in my story, whether you're the elderly parent sensing something wrong or the adult child witnessing suspicious behavior, trust your instincts. Document everything. Seek help. Elder abuse thrives in silence and isolation, but it withers in the light of exposure and community support. To the Susans of the world, those who see the elderly as opportunities rather than human beings, know this. We are not weak simply because we are old. We survived wars, recessions, heartbreaks, and losses you cannot imagine. We raised children, built careers, and created the very foundations you stand on. We may move slower, we may need help sometimes, but we are not helpless. And we are certainly not alone. My story had a happy ending because my son was watching, because strangers became allies, because justice, though sometimes slow, eventually arrived. But thousands of others aren't so fortunate. They sit in nursing homes they didn't choose, their homes sold without their true consent, their voices silenced by those who should protect them. So I ask you, what would you do if you discovered someone was exploiting your elderly parent? Would you look away because it's uncomfortable? Would you justify it because inheritance feels like you're right? Or would you stand up, speak out, and protect those who protected you when you couldn't protect yourself? Check on your elderly neighbors. Visit your aging parents. Ask questions when something seems wrong. Be the advocate they need, the voice they might have lost, the shield against those who would prey on their vulnerability. And if you're that elderly person, feeling trapped, sensing danger but unsure where to turn, reach out. Call Adult Protective Services. Contact the National Center on Elder Abuse hotline. Tell someone at your church, your doctor, your friend. You are not alone, and you are worth protecting. My grandmother's pearls still rest in my jewelry box, having survived another generation of hardship. Like them, we endure. We may be scratched, may show our age, but we remain valuable. We remain worthy. We remain family. What's your story? Have you witnessed elder abuse in your family or community? What signs did you see and what action did you take? Share your experiences below, not for entertainment but for education. Together we can protect our elders, honor their sacrifices, and ensure that their golden years truly shine. Remember, getting old is a privilege, denied to many. How we treat our elderly reflects who we are as human beings. Choose kindness, choose respect, choose love. Because someday, if we're lucky, we'll all be old too.